Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's drift into a peaceful slumber together. This time I will tell you about Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack lived with his mother in a small cottage at the edge of a village. They weren't rich by any measure. In fact, they were very poor. The cottage was simple, made from old stone and wood, with thatched roofing that had seen better days. The air around their humble home was often filled with the scent of the earth and the sounds of nature as they lived on the edge of a small farm. Their main source of income came from their one cow, which they kept in a small shed at the back of the house. This cow was Jack and his mother's only source of sustenance and livelihood. The cow would provide milk, which Jack's mother would sell at the market, and in exchange, they were able to buy food and other basic necessities. Life had not been kind to them, but they made do, always managing to scrape by with the bare minimum. Jack's father had passed away when Jack was still a small boy, leaving his mother to care for him alone. His mother was a kind and loving woman, but the years had taken their toll. Her once bright eyes were now clouded with worry, and her face was etched with the lines of hardship. She did everything she could to make sure that Jack had enough to eat and clothes to wear, but life was not easy for them. Every day was a struggle, and Jack knew his mother worked hard to ensure they could survive. But despite her tireless efforts, their situation seemed to grow worse with each passing year. The farm that Jack's mother had inherited was small, and they had very little land to farm. Most of their food came from what little they could grow in their garden, and they relied heavily on the milk from their cow to get by. However, as time passed, things began to take a turn for the worse. The cow had grown old, and its milk supply had dwindled significantly. Without the cow, Jack and his mother would have nothing. The small amount of food they had managed to keep for themselves was now running low, and there were fewer and fewer customers willing to buy the milk. One day, Jack's mother decided that they could no longer keep the cow. It had become more of a burden than a blessing. Jack's mother had heard from a neighbor that the local market would pay a fair price for the cow, so she made the difficult decision to sell it. She knew it was a risk, but she hoped that by selling the cow, they would be able to buy enough food and supplies to last them through the winter. With a heavy heart, she asked Jack to take the cow to market and sell it for as much as he could get. Jack was reluctant at first. He loved the cow dearly. It had been a companion to him for many years, and he had grown attached to it. But Jack's mother was firm in her decision. She told him that the cow was no longer useful to them and that the money they could get from selling it would help them survive. Jack, though sad, understood the gravity of the situation and agreed to take the cow to market. The next morning, Jack set off early, leading the cow down the narrow dirt road that led to the village market. As he walked, he thought about his mother and the hard decision she had made. He could see the worry etched on her face when she sent him off, and he wished he could do something to make things better. But the cow had become weak, and it was no longer capable of providing them with the milk they needed. Jack hoped that he could at least get enough money for the cow to buy something that would help his mother get through the hard times ahead. As Jack made his way to the market, he passed through the fields and forests that surrounded their home. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a warm golden glow over the land. Jack paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the landscape. He was a young boy, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. He knew that everything depended on this trip to the market. He wished there were another way, but he knew his mother was right. They had no other choice. When Jack arrived at the market, he was greeted by the bustling noise of the busy trade. Merchants were shouting out prices for their goods, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh produce, livestock, and baked goods. Jack walked through the market, hoping to find a buyer who would give him a fair price for the cow. However, after hours of waiting and negotiating, Jack found that no one was willing to pay more than a few coins for the cow. The cow, old and weary as it was, didn't have much value in the market. Jack's heart sank as he realized that the money from selling the cow might not be enough to buy food for his mother. As the sun began to set, Jack was about to give up and head back home, discouraged and empty-handed. He sat down on a bench, feeling defeated. The cow had been his last hope, and now he had nothing left to offer. It was then that a strange man approached him. The man was older than Jack's father would have been and wore a long cloak that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something about him that made Jack curious. The man asked Jack why he looked so downcast, and Jack explained his situation. He told the man about his mother's decision to sell the cow and how, after hours of trying to find a buyer, he had not been able to sell it for anything of value. The man listened attentively and then, after a moment of silence, made Jack an offer. He said he had a special deal for Jack, a deal that could change everything. He told Jack that he could trade the cow for something far more valuable than money, a handful of magic beans. These were no ordinary beans, the man explained. They were enchanted, and if Jack planted them, they would grow into something extraordinary. Jack, who had never heard of such a thing, was skeptical. Magic beans? It all sounded too good to be true. But the man's eyes sparkled with a mysterious gleam, and Jack found himself intrigued. The man assured Jack that the beans would bring great fortune, far more than any amount of money could. Jack hesitated for a moment, but then, thinking of his mother and how they had nothing left, he decided to take a leap of faith. He agreed to the trade and handed the cow over to the man in exchange for the handful of beans. With the beans in hand, Jack set off for home, feeling both nervous and excited. He didn't know what to expect, but he hoped that somehow the beans would bring about a change in his life. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would lead him on the most extraordinary adventure of his life. Jack's mind was racing as he walked back home, his heart pounding in his chest. The bag of beans felt heavy in his hand, though they were nothing more than a small handful of what seemed to be ordinary, unremarkable beans. The man he had met at the market had seemed so confident about their magic properties, but deep down, Jack wasn't sure if he had made the right decision. He had trusted the stranger's words, but now, walking back down the familiar road to his small cottage, doubt crept into his mind. Could these really be magical beans, as the man had claimed? The sky was beginning to darken as the sun sank behind the horizon. Jack could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the trees as the evening breeze whispered through the air. He had hoped that this strange encounter might turn into something wonderful, but as the evening grew late, he felt a gnawing sense of unease. What if the beans were just ordinary beans after all, and he had traded away their only source of food for nothing? The more he thought about it, the more nervous he became. As he approached the little cottage where his mother was waiting, Jack could already see her silhouette in the window. She had probably been waiting for him all day, hoping he would return with good news. The thought of telling her about the beans made Jack feel even more anxious. What if she was angry with him? What if she didn't understand? After all, the cow had been their last hope, and he had traded it for something intangible, beans. Even if they were magical, they didn't seem like much at the moment. When Jack finally reached the cottage, he opened the door and stepped inside, his footsteps slow and hesitant. His mother was sitting by the fire, sewing a patch onto a worn piece of clothing. She looked up when she heard the door creak open, and her face broke into a smile when she saw Jack. She was relieved to see him home safely. "Jack," she said warmly, putting down the sewing. "Did you sell the cow? What did you get for it?" Jack stood in the doorway for a moment, holding the small bag of beans tightly in his hands. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to explain what he had done. His mother looked at him expectantly, sensing his hesitation. "Well," she asked, her voice gentle but curious. "What did you get?" Jack sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as he stepped forward and opened his hand to reveal the handful of beans. "I didn't sell the cow for money," he said softly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I traded it for these." His mother's face froze for a moment as she stared at the beans, her brow furrowing in disbelief. She must have thought Jack was joking or playing a trick on her, but there was no end of amusement in his eyes. He was serious. "These are beans?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief and confusion. Jack nodded slowly, still unsure of how to explain what had happened. He went on to tell her about the strange man he had met at the market and how he had offered the beans in exchange for the cow. He recounted the man's promise that the beans were magical and that they could bring great fortune if planted. At first, Jack's mother was too stunned to speak. She looked at the beans in Jack's hand, then back at him, as if trying to make sense of the situation. How could her son have traded away the cow, their only means of survival, for a handful of beans? "You mean to tell me that you gave away our cow, the cow that gave us milk and kept us alive, for these?" she asked, her voice rising with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Jack lowered his gaze, feeling ashamed of what he had done. His mother had always been the one to make decisions for them, and now he had gone against her wishes. The look of disappointment in her eyes made Jack's stomach twist in knots. "I'm sorry, Mother," Jack said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought they were magic beans. The man said they would bring us great fortune." His mother sighed heavily, shaking her head. "Fortune? Jack, do you really think that beans, of all things, could change our lives? We are poor because we've lost the only thing we had that could help us, and now we have nothing." She paused, her face filled with sadness. "We've worked so hard, and now you've thrown it all away." Jack's heart sank at the words, and he could feel tears welling up in his eyes. He had hoped that the beans would turn out to be something extraordinary, but in that moment, they seemed like nothing more than a cruel reminder of his failure. He had let his mother down, and he had no way of fixing it. For a few moments, there was silence in the cottage. The crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the room, and Jack could feel the weight of his mother's disappointment pressing heavily on his chest. Finally, she stood up, her face softening slightly as she looked at him. "Jack," she said gently, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. "You didn't mean to make things worse. But you have to understand, these beans," she paused, shaking her head as she let out a soft sigh. "These beans are no better than a handful of dirt." She reached out and gently took the beans from Jack's hand. "We'll plant them, if only to teach you a lesson about thinking before you act," she said, though there was no anger in her voice now, only a deep sadness. "Tomorrow morning, we'll plant them in the garden." Jack nodded silently, grateful that his mother was not angry with him, even though he knew he had let her down. He felt defeated, unsure of what the future would hold. He had hoped for a miracle, but instead, he had given away the one thing that had kept them going. That night, they went to bed with heavy hearts, both uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. Jack lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had truly ruined everything. But no matter how much he turned the events over in his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that the strange man's words had been true. Somehow, he believed that the beans might hold some secret that could change their fate. But for now, all Jack could do was hope that the next morning would bring a new day and perhaps, just perhaps, a new beginning. The night passed quietly in the small cottage, with Jack lying awake, staring up at the ceiling, unable to shake the weight of his mother's disappointment. He wasn't angry with her for being upset. She had every right to be. He had made a rash decision, a decision that could have disastrous consequences. But there was still a small spark of hope within him, a faint belief that perhaps the beans were special after all. The next morning, after a long, restless night, Jack and his mother went outside to the garden, which was tucked behind the cottage. The garden was small, with a few wilted vegetables and sparse herbs growing in the soil. His mother didn't say much as she prepared the small plot for the beans, though there was a resigned air about her, as if she had accepted the situation for what it was. Jack watched her, feeling the weight of the decision he had made hanging heavily in the air. It was early, the sun just beginning to rise, and the air was still cool, carrying the earthy scent of dew on the grass. With a sigh, Jack's mother knelt down and began digging a small hole in the soil. She wasn't rough with the earth, but instead moved with a gentleness that spoke of years of tending to the garden. Jack watched her silently for a moment, then, realizing that she was waiting for him, took the small bag of beans from his pocket and carefully placed a few beans into the hole his mother had prepared. Together, they covered the beans with soil, pushing the earth back into place. The quiet morning passed slowly, and Jack could feel the heaviness in the air as his mother, with a resigned look on her face, tended to the garden. It was clear that she wasn't expecting anything to happen. How could she? After all, they had simply planted a handful of beans in the dirt. The thought that these beans could grow into something magical seemed more and more unlikely with every passing moment. But just as Jack was about to give up hope entirely, something extraordinary happened. A soft, faint rumble echoed through the air, so subtle that it might have been mistaken for a passing gust of wind. But then the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, just slightly at first, as if something beneath the earth had begun to stir. Jack and his mother exchanged a startled glance, both of them feeling the slight tremor. They stood there in silence, unsure of what was happening. Before they could say another word, the earth before them began to shift. The small patch of soil where the beans had been planted started to bulge and writhe, as though the earth itself was waking up from a long slumber. Jack's mother gasped, her hand instinctively reaching out to Jack's arm as she took a cautious step backward. She could hardly believe what was happening in front of her. From the earth, a small shoot began to emerge, thin at first, and then growing faster than they could comprehend. Jack watched in awe as the shoot quickly spiraled upward, growing taller and taller with each passing second. Within moments, it became clear that this was no ordinary plant. The stalk wasn't just tall, it was enormous, shooting up into the sky with incredible speed. The two stood in stunned silence, watching as the beanstalk stretched higher and higher, its twisting vines climbing far beyond their line of sight. The towering plant seemed to reach for the heavens themselves, its broad, glossy leaves fluttering in the breeze. It seemed impossible, too fantastical to believe, but there it was, growing right before their eyes. "Jack," his mother whispered, her voice barely audible, "what is this? What have you done?" Jack stood frozen, unable to answer. He had no explanation, no words to describe the incredible sight in front of him. The beanstalk continued its ascent, reaching so high that it seemed to pierce the clouds above. The base of the stalk, where it had sprouted from the soil, was now as thick as a tree trunk, its bark-like surface winding upward. It was the most magnificent thing Jack had ever seen. For a long moment, they simply stared at the beanstalk in awe, unsure of what to do. Jack felt a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation stirring within him. Was this really happening? Was this what the old man had meant when he spoke of the beans bringing fortune? Could it be that this towering plant was the key to a better life for them? "Jack, do you think should we climb it?" his mother finally asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Jack hesitated, his eyes still fixed on the beanstalk as it swayed gently in the wind. Climbing such a colossal plant seemed like a ridiculous idea, but deep down, something within Jack urged him to take the risk. What if this was the answer they had been looking for? What if this beanstalk could lead them to the fortune the old man had promised? I think we have to," Jack said slowly, his voice filled with a new sense of determination. "We can't just let it grow like this without finding out where it leads." His mother, though hesitant, nodded in agreement. "I suppose we have no choice now, do we?" With that, Jack began to climb the massive beanstalk. It wasn't easy, its surface was rough, and the vines twisted unpredictably, but Jack's heart pounded with anticipation as he ascended. The air was cooler the higher he climbed, and the sound of his feet against the thick stalk was the only thing that broke the stillness of the morning. As Jack climbed higher, he looked down, his heart skipping a beat as he saw how far he had risen. The cottage and his mother were now tiny specks below, barely visible through the mist that surrounded the beanstalk's base. The world below seemed so small, and yet the world above, where the beanstalk led, seemed so vast, so unknown. Hours seemed to pass as Jack climbed higher and higher, but just as he was beginning to wonder if he would ever reach the top, something incredible happened. The mist parted, and the dense clouds that had surrounded the beanstalk broke away. Before him, Jack saw a strange and magical land, a land unlike anything he had ever imagined. At the very top of the beanstalk, stretching as far as the eye could see, was an enormous land filled with towering castles, vast fields, and strange creatures. The landscape appeared to be part dream and part reality, with everything shining as if bathed in a perpetual golden light. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and the distant sound of wind chimes. Jack stood there in awe, hardly able to believe his eyes. He had reached the top of the beanstalk and found himself in a world that seemed more magical than anything he had ever heard of in stories. This, Jack thought, could be the beginning of something extraordinary. But what awaited him at the top? Was this the treasure he had been seeking? Or was it the beginning of an adventure that would change his life forever? The figure before Jack was unlike anything he had ever seen. Standing at the far end of the hallway, the giant looked down at him with an expression that was a mix of curiosity and suspicion. His towering figure, dressed in a rich, yet simple tunic, made Jack feel small and insignificant in comparison. The giant's eyes glinted with an ancient, knowing light, and his immense hands rested lightly by his side, ready for action at a moment's notice. The sheer presence of the giant was enough to send a chill through Jack's spine, but he couldn't bring himself to move. It was as if his feet were rooted to the ground. The giant's voice broke the heavy silence in the castle, deep and booming, echoing through the vast stone halls. "Who dares to enter my domain?" the giant rumbled, his tone low but commanding. "What brings you here, little one?" Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry from nerves. He had never been face to face with someone or something so powerful. He had heard stories of giants, but never had he imagined they could be so real, so close. In this moment, Jack's mind raced for an explanation, a reason for his sudden appearance in the castle. He thought back to the Beanstalk, the mysterious old man, and the strange promise of fortune. I didn't mean to intrude," Jack said, his voice barely more than a whisper, though he tried to sound as confident as he could. I came from below, from the land at the bottom of the Beanstalk. I didn't know this place existed. Please, I mean no harm." The giant studied Jack with piercing eyes, the silence between them stretching on for what seemed like forever. Jack shifted uncomfortably under the giant's gaze, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had no idea how the giant would react. Would he be hostile? Would he throw Jack out for daring to enter his realm? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the giant spoke again, his voice softer this time, though it still carried an air of authority. "Interesting," the giant mused, his eyes never leaving Jack. "I have not seen many visitors from below. You are brave, I will give you that. But you are also foolish to wander so carelessly into a land you do not understand." Jack's heart skipped a beat, but he managed to hold his ground, meeting the giant's gaze. "I'm looking for something," Jack explained, his voice gaining a bit more strength as he spoke. "I came up the Beanstalk to find something that could change my life and the life of my mother. We've been struggling, and I thought maybe there was something here that could help us." The giant's brow furrowed, and his expression became thoughtful. He seemed to consider Jack's words carefully, the gears in his mind turning slowly. Jack could feel the tension in the air, but there was a flicker of understanding in the giant's eyes, as though he was beginning to see Jack not as an intruder, but as a visitor in need. "You seek fortune, little one?" the giant asked, his tone still gruff, but now tinged with a hint of curiosity. "You seek something that will bring you wealth, or power, or happiness?" Jack nodded. "Yes. We have nothing left. My mother and we've been struggling for so long. I thought the Beanstalk might lead me to something that could help us." The giant's lips curled into a faint smile. It was a smile, but one that did not seem entirely friendly. "Fortune is a tricky thing, young man. It is not something that can be given freely, nor is it something you can simply stumble upon. It must be earned through courage, wisdom, and strength." Jack's pulse quickened. He had come so far, climbed so high, only to find himself in a place where he was being tested, where the answers he sought were not going to be handed to him. But Jack's determination burned strong. He had come this far, and he was not about to turn back now. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Jack said firmly, his voice steady. "I will face whatever challenges you have. I just want to help my mother and make things right." The giant's eyes softened slightly, though there was still a hardness to them. He nodded slowly, as if Jack's words had earned his respect. "Very well," the giant said, his voice quieter now, yet still carrying the weight of his immense size. "I will give you a chance, little one. But remember, the path you walk is fraught with danger. If you truly seek fortune, you must be prepared to face trials that will test your very soul." Jack felt a surge of hope. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He had found his way into the heart of the giant's land, and now, it seemed, the giant was offering him a chance to prove himself, to earn what he had come for. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice filled with gratitude, though the weight of the giant's words still hung heavily in the air. "I won't let you down." The giant nodded, then turned and began to walk away, his massive steps shaking the ground beneath Jack's feet. "Follow me," the giant commanded, his voice still deep and resonant. "There is much you must learn, and much you must face before you can claim the fortune you seek." Jack followed the giant through the enormous castle, his heart racing with both excitement and fear. As he walked through the dark, silent halls, Jack couldn't help but wonder what kind of trials lay ahead. What challenges would he have to face to earn the giant's respect, and, more importantly, the fortune that would change his life? They came to a grand chamber at the heart of the castle, its walls adorned with intricate carvings of ancient battles and kings. The room was vast, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch on forever. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, upon which rested an ornate, golden harp. The harp glowed with an ethereal light, its strings vibrating with a sound that was almost imperceptible but somehow full of magic. "This," the giant said, gesturing to the harp, "is one of the treasures of this land. It holds immense power. If you can play it, you will prove your worth. Only those with the skill and heart to play its song can claim the fortune you seek. But be warned, it is no easy task. Many have tried and failed." Jack stared at the harp, its golden frame shimmering in the dim light. He had no idea how to play such an instrument, but he was determined. This was his chance. This was his moment. The giant stepped back, watching Jack with an unreadable expression. "You have one chance," he said. "Play the harp, and the path to your fortune will be revealed. Fail, and you will be sent back to where you came from, with nothing." Jack nodded, feeling both the weight of the giant's words and the opportunity that lay before him. He stepped forward, his hands trembling as he approached the harp. It seemed almost magical, its presence commanding attention in the room. With a deep breath, Jack reached out and placed his fingers gently on the strings, ready to play. Jack stood before the magnificent harp, his heart racing as he felt the weight of the giant's words bearing down on him. This was his moment, the chance he had been waiting for. His mind was a whirl of thoughts, but one thing was clear: he had to succeed. There was no turning back now. The giant, standing at the edge of the grand chamber, watched Jack with an unwavering gaze, his massive arms crossed over his chest. The room around them was eerily quiet, save for the soft echo of Jack's breath as he prepared to play the magical harp. The air was thick with anticipation, and Jack could feel the pressure building with every passing second. The harp seemed to glow with a light of its own, its golden strings shimmering faintly in the dim, flickering torchlight of the chamber. Taking a deep breath, Jack reached out cautiously and placed his fingers on the strings. They were cool to the touch, and the harp's frame felt delicate in his hands, despite its immense size. Jack had never played such an instrument before, nor did he have any idea of how to play it. But somehow, he knew that this wasn't about being perfect, it was about connecting with something beyond himself, tapping into the very magic that the harp was said to hold. He gently plucked one of the strings, and a soft, clear note rang out, filling the chamber. It was a sweet, melodic sound that reverberated through the air. Encouraged, Jack plucked a few more strings, creating a simple, yet soothing tune. But as soon as the melody began to take shape, the harp seemed to respond. The notes grew louder, more insistent, as if the harp itself was guiding him, urging him to play more passionately, more fiercely. The sound of the harp's music seemed to swell with a life of its own, filling the room and vibrating the stone walls. Each note was like a pulse of energy, a wave of magic that surged through Jack's fingertips. The air around him seemed to hum with a strange power, and Jack couldn't help but feel that he was part of something much larger than himself. The harp's song grew more intricate, its melody evolving into something more complex. Jack's fingers moved of their own accord, responding to the unseen rhythm that flowed through the harp. But then, just as Jack was beginning to lose himself in the music, something unexpected happened. A harsh, dissonant chord rang out from the harp, jarring and unpleasant. The sound sent a shock through Jack's body, and for a moment his hands trembled. He had faltered, lost his connection with the rhythm, and the harp seemed to reject him for a brief moment, vibrating with a fierce, discordant energy. The giant watched silently from the corner of the room, his gaze unreadable. Jack's heart sank. He had failed. He had broken the flow of the music, and he feared that the giant would cast him out. But instead of scolding him or sending him away, the giant simply gestured for Jack to continue. "Do not stop," the giant rumbled, his voice low and steady. "The harp will test you. It will challenge you. But you must persist. Do not let the failure be the end of you." Jack, though shaken, took a deep breath. The giant's words rang in his ears. He must persist. He had come so far, and he could not afford to give up now. With a steadying breath, Jack placed his hands back on the harp, his fingers feeling more confident this time. He began again, this time with more determination, more focus. He could still feel the pull of the magic that seemed to resonate within the strings, and he let the music flow through him once more. As he played, the song began to take shape again, this time with a new sense of purpose. The melody grew stronger, more vibrant, and the harp seemed to respond, resonating with the energy Jack was putting into it. The room itself seemed to pulse with the rhythm, and Jack felt a deep connection to the music. It was no longer just about playing the right notes, it was about understanding the magic within the harp and allowing that magic to flow through him. The sound of the music filled the chamber, filling Jack's heart with warmth. The dissonant notes had faded, replaced by a beautiful harmony that seemed to resonate with the very core of the castle. Jack's fingers danced across the strings, each movement fluid and instinctual. It was as if the harp was guiding him, pulling him deeper into its magical song. And then, as Jack reached the crescendo of the melody, something extraordinary happened. The entire room seemed to come alive. The walls shimmered, the air hummed with energy, and the golden harp glowed brighter than ever before. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of connection to the castle, to the giant, and to the world that lay beyond the Beanstalk. The music was no longer just a song, it was a bridge, a link between the land of the giants and the world below. As the final note of the harp echoed through the chamber, Jack slowly lowered his hands from the strings, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was silent now, the music still hanging in the air like a lingering, magical echo. Jack stood there for a moment, breathless, his mind still processing what had just happened. The giant stepped forward, his massive footsteps reverberating through the stone floor. Jack's heart raced as he waited for the giant's judgment. Would he be pleased with Jack's performance? Or would he be cast out for failing to play perfectly? The giant stood before him, his face unreadable. Jack braced himself for whatever might come next. "Well done, little one," the giant said, his voice deep and powerful, yet tinged with approval. "You have played the harp with heart, with passion, and with the understanding that many fail to grasp. You have proven yourself worthy." Jack's heart leaped in his chest at the giant's words. He had done it. He had passed the test. The giant's approval was more than he could have hoped for, and for the first time since climbing the beanstalk, Jack felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The giant stepped aside, revealing a door that Jack hadn't noticed before. The door was ancient, made of dark wood and adorned with intricate carvings of mythical creatures and symbols that seemed to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. "Beyond this door lies the fortune you seek," the giant said, his voice now softer, almost reverential. "But remember, Jack, fortune is not just about wealth. It is about understanding, wisdom, and the choices you make. The path you have taken is one of great significance. Choose wisely." Jack nodded, still in awe of the giant's words. He had come seeking fortune, and now he was standing at the threshold of something truly extraordinary. With a deep breath, Jack stepped forward and opened the door. As it creaked open, Jack could feel the pull of something greater, something beyond just riches and material wealth. The adventure had only just begun. The giant's words echoed in Jack's mind as he stepped toward the ancient door. Fortune is not just about wealth. It is about understanding, wisdom, and the choices you make. Jack paused for a moment before he pushed the heavy door open. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had no idea what lay beyond it, but he had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. The door creaked on its hinges, revealing what appeared to be a vast chamber beyond. The room was dimly lit by flickering torches mounted on the stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, damp stone, and something more mysterious, a kind of ethereal energy that seemed to hum softly in the atmosphere. The floor was covered with an intricate mosaic, its patterns so complex that they seemed to shift and change as Jack moved closer, as though alive with hidden meaning. The walls of the chamber were adorned with strange symbols, each one glowing faintly in the shadows, as if they were ancient runes with secrets to tell. As Jack entered the room, the door slammed shut behind him with a resounding thud, leaving him in the silence of the chamber. His senses were heightened, the mystery of the place washing over him like a wave. He wasn't sure whether to feel awe or fear. The air was charged with a palpable energy, as if something ancient and powerful was waiting for him to discover it. He felt as though he were standing on the threshold of a world far beyond his own, a world of secrets, mysteries, and treasures. At the far end of the room, Jack noticed a raised platform, upon which rested a large, ornate chest. It was made of dark wood, intricately carved with more of those mysterious symbols. The chest seemed to glow faintly, as if it were the source of the energy that filled the room. Jack couldn't help but feel drawn to it. He slowly walked toward it, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence of the chamber. As he approached the chest, he felt a strange sensation, a mix of anticipation and dread. His mind raced with questions. Was this the fortune he had come for? Would the chest contain the wealth and treasures he sought, or was there something more to it? The giant had warned him that fortune was about understanding and wisdom, but what did that truly mean? With trembling hands, Jack reached out and lifted the lid of the chest. Inside, he found a collection of objects, each one seemingly ordinary but somehow imbued with a deep sense of power. At the top of the chest was a small, leather-bound book. It was old, its pages yellowed with age, and the cover was etched with the same strange symbols that adorned the room. Beneath the book were a collection of gemstones, each one shimmering with an inner light, as if they held untold power. There was also a beautifully crafted dagger, its blade gleaming sharp and cold. And finally, at the bottom of the chest was a small, ornate key, its metal glinting in the dim light. Jack reached for the book first, his fingers brushing lightly against the leather cover. As soon as he touched it, he felt a surge of energy pass through him, as though the book was calling to him, urging him to open it. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he might find within. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he slowly opened the book to the first page. The pages were filled with handwritten words in a language Jack didn't understand. But as his eyes scanned the text, something extraordinary happened. The words on the page began to shift and change, rearranging themselves into something more familiar, more comprehensible. The language seemed to change before his very eyes, transforming into words he could read. It was as though the book was revealing its secrets to him, unlocking knowledge that had been hidden for centuries. The book spoke of ancient wisdom, of understanding the true meaning of fortune, of seeking balance and harmony in life. It described how wealth was not just measured in gold or gems, but in the choices one made, in the strength of one's character, and in the ability to see beyond the material world. The true fortune, the book revealed, was found in wisdom, in the ability to make choices that would lead to a fulfilling and meaningful life. Jack read on, his mind racing as the words on the pages filled him with a new sense of purpose. He had come seeking riches, but what he found in the book was far more valuable. It was knowledge that would guide him in life, that would help him make the right choices for himself and his mother. As Jack closed the book, a sense of clarity washed over him. The chest had not contained gold or jewels, but something much more precious, wisdom. He had found the fortune he sought, but it wasn't something that could be measured by material wealth. It was something deeper, something that would shape his future, guide his actions, and help him lead a life of purpose. Jack turned his attention back to the other items in the chest. The gemstones glimmered with an otherworldly light, and the dagger was beautifully crafted, its blade sharp and gleaming. But for some reason, Jack wasn't drawn to them in the way he had expected. The book had given him what he truly needed, understanding. The key, however, caught his attention. It was small but intricate, its design unlike anything he had ever seen before. He felt that it was significant, that it had a purpose he had yet to understand. As he reached for the key, a voice echoed in the chamber, deep and resonant, filling the room with a sense of gravity. It was the giant's voice, distant but clear. "You have learned well, Jack," the giant said, his tone filled with approval. "You have discovered the true meaning of fortune. The key you hold will open the door to a new path, a path that will lead you to your destiny." Jack's heart skipped a beat as the giant's words sank in. The key wasn't just a physical object, It was a symbol of his journey, a key to unlocking the future that lay ahead. The giant had spoken of choices, of wisdom, and now Jack understood. The fortune he sought wasn't something that could be found in material wealth. It was a path that would lead him to something far greater than gold. As Jack stood there in the chamber, the weight of the key in his hand felt like a promise. A promise that the future, though uncertain, was full of possibility. And with that knowledge, he turned and walked back toward the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Jack stood before the heavy wooden door, the ancient key clenched tightly in his hand. The room behind him seemed to hum with an unspoken energy, its mysteries now lay bare before him. He could feel the weight of the key, not just in his hand, but deep within his chest, as if it were more than just a physical object. It was a symbol, a catalyst for the change he had sought. The wisdom from the book, the understanding of true fortune, had transformed something in him. He was no longer the same young boy who had set out to sell his cow. Now, he was standing at the threshold of something greater, something that required courage and responsibility. The future that lay ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew that the choice was his to make. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped toward the door. His fingers wrapped around the ornate key, its cold metal a sharp contrast to the warmth of the chamber. With a steady hand, he inserted the key into the lock and turned it slowly. There was a moment of stillness, a brief pause where time seemed to hang in the air, before the lock gave way with a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a long hallway that stretched ahead, lit only by the faint glow of torches mounted on the walls. Jack hesitated for a moment, his heart racing with anticipation. He wasn't sure what he would find on the other side, but he knew that it was a path he needed to walk. A new beginning awaited him, one that would require everything he had learned and everything he was willing to learn. He stepped forward, leaving the room behind and entering the narrow passage. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the stone hallway, amplifying the quiet in a way that made it feel as though the entire castle was holding its breath, waiting for him to continue. As Jack moved through the hall, the air grew cooler, and the walls seemed to close in around him, narrowing as he progressed. It was a stark contrast to the vast, open spaces he had encountered before. The further he walked, the more the walls seemed to press in on him, as though the very castle itself were testing his resolve. But Jack didn't falter. The lessons he had learned, the wisdom he had gained from the harp, the book, and the giant, filled him with a quiet confidence. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He had already faced uncertainty, and he had already made choices that would shape his future. This path was just another step, a continuation of his journey. The hallway eventually opened up into another large chamber, even grander than the first. The space was filled with an ethereal glow, the source of which was not immediately apparent. The walls were adorned with massive tapestries depicting great battles, moments of triumph and sorrow, but unlike the cold stone corridors, this room felt alive with energy. The air crackled with an intense sense of possibility. At the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood a massive stone archway. Its arch was adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story, one of great significance. The archway, unlike anything Jack had seen before, appeared to shimmer as if it were not entirely a part of the room, but rather a portal to another world. Without thinking, Jack stepped toward the arch, drawn by an invisible force. The closer he got, the more he felt a pull, a magnetic energy that seemed to tug at the very core of his being. This was it, he realized. This was the moment the giant had spoken of, the path to his destiny. He was at the crossroads, standing before a threshold that could lead him to the life he had always dreamed of, or to a new understanding of what it meant to truly live. The fortune he sought was not just a treasure, but a way of being, a way of living. He stepped closer to the archway and paused just before entering, taking a deep breath. The air around him seemed to shimmer, the energy in the room crackling like static electricity. The archway seemed to respond to his presence, glowing even brighter as if acknowledging his arrival. It was a moment of profound significance, and Jack knew that stepping through this arch would be a choice that could never be undone. But just as he was about to take the final step, a voice echoed from behind him. It was deep, powerful, and familiar. The giant's voice. "You have learned much, Jack," the giant said, his words filling the chamber. "But remember, the path you are about to walk is not an easy one. You will be tested again and again. The world you are about to enter is one where your choices will shape everything. It is a land of both great beauty and great danger. You must be prepared, for it will not be like the world you know." Jack turned slowly, his eyes meeting the giant's gaze. The giant stood in the doorway of the chamber, watching him with an expression that was both serious and approving. His enormous form cast a shadow across the room, and Jack could feel the weight of his words in every fiber of his being. "I understand," Jack replied, his voice steady. He had no illusions about the challenges that lay ahead. The giant had warned him this was a path that would demand everything of him. But Jack had changed. He had learned that true fortune wasn't about wealth, it was about wisdom and the courage to make the right choices. He was ready. "I'm ready to face whatever comes." The giant nodded slowly, a look of approval crossing his face. "Then go, Jack. The path is yours to take. But know that the journey you are about to begin will shape not only your life, but the lives of those you love. The key you hold is the key to your future, and with it, you will unlock more than you can imagine." With those final words, the giant turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps fading into the distance. Jack stood for a moment, staring at the archway. The choice had been made. There was no turning back now. He stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the archway. The moment his foot crossed the invisible boundary, the room seemed to vanish. The world around him shimmered and distorted, the walls of the castle fading away into nothingness. He felt a rush of energy as though he were being pulled through time and space, his surroundings spinning in a kaleidoscope of light and color. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything stopped. The world around Jack steadied, and he found himself standing in a new place. The landscape stretched out before him, vast and unfamiliar. The air was different here, fresher, tinged with the scent of wildflowers and something more, a feeling of boundless potential. Jack knew that the journey was far from over. This new world, this new chapter of his life, was just beginning. And with the wisdom he had gained and the courage in his heart, Jack was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. Jack stood in the center of a vast, breathtaking landscape. The sky above him was a deep, serene blue, and the land stretched out in all directions, dotted with rolling hills, towering trees, and fields of vibrant flowers. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and wild vegetation. It was a world that seemed to pulse with life, untamed and full of possibility. At first, Jack stood still, taking in the beauty of it all. His journey, which had begun so many days ago with the sale of a cow, had brought him here, into this mysterious land that seemed so different from the one he had known. Everything felt new and uncertain, but beneath that uncertainty, Jack could feel something else stirring within him, a deep sense of peace, a knowing that he was where he was meant to be. He glanced down at the key still clutched in his hand, its cold metal a reminder of the choices he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the wisdom he had gained along the way. The key was no longer just an object, it was a symbol of his transformation, of the new path he had chosen. And though the journey had been difficult, he now understood the meaning of true fortune. It wasn't wealth, nor material gain. It was the ability to see beyond the surface of things, to understand that life's true riches lay in the choices we make, in the love we give, and the wisdom we seek. Jack had come to this land seeking fortune, but what he had found was something much greater, a deeper understanding of the world around him, and a realization of his own strength and purpose. With a deep breath, Jack took a step forward. The world before him was wide open, filled with possibilities, and he was no longer the young boy who had set out with nothing but hope and a handful of magic beans. He was someone who had faced challenges, made difficult choices, and come through it all with a sense of clarity. He had earned his fortune, not through gold or jewels, but through the wisdom he had gathered along the way. The land around him felt alive with energy, as if it too was waiting for Jack to make his mark. He knew that his adventure wasn't over yet. There were still things to discover, people to meet, and challenges to face. But Jack no longer feared the unknown. He was ready. With each step he took, the path ahead seemed to open up before him, revealing new horizons, new opportunities. As Jack wandered deeper into this new world, he noticed that he was no longer alone. There were others here, people and creatures from different walks of life. Some were farmers, tending to crops that seemed to grow with an almost magical vitality. Others were craftsmen, building beautiful structures from materials Jack had never seen before. There were even animals, creatures of all shapes and sizes, each one living in harmony with the land. It was a world full of life and possibility, a world that welcomed those who were willing to understand its ways. And then, Jack saw her, his mother. Standing at the edge of a field, her face turned toward him with a look of wonder and joy. She had somehow found her way into this land as well. The sight of her filled Jack's heart with warmth. They had both come so far, and now they were here together. "Jack," she called out, her voice carrying across the field. "Is it really you?" Jack ran to her, his heart racing, and when they embraced, it felt like the culmination of everything they had been through. The hardships, the struggles, the choices, they had all led to this moment. Together, they had found their way to this new world, where they could start again, where their lives could be filled with meaning and purpose. "We made it, Mother," Jack whispered. "We made it." And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. They had found their fortune, not in material wealth, but in the love they shared and the journey they had taken together. The beanstalk, the giant, the harp, all of it had been part of a much larger story, one that had brought them here to this moment. As Jack looked out at the horizon, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. There were still many mysteries to unravel, many adventures to undertake. But now, with his mother by his side and the lessons of his journey fresh in his heart, Jack felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The land before him was filled with endless possibilities. The world was his to explore, his to shape. And as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden light over the fields, Jack took his mother's hand and walked forward into the unknown, confident in the knowledge that they were not alone. Together, they would build a future filled with hope, wisdom, and love. And so, the story of Jack and the Beanstalk came to its end. But in reality, it was only the beginning of a new journey, one that would last for a lifetime. That's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Hopefully this story can help you sleep. Good night.